For more than a century, strange stories have swirled around the Great Lakes. Massive ancient copper mines are scattered across the region. There are copper tools buried in the soil that predate the pyramids, a mystery that has fueled conspiracy theories for generations. Some say the copper was stolen away, shipped across the ocean to power the Bronze Age. Others mention the Vikings, or even Ice Age Europeans carving their mark in Michigan's bedrock. Were these shores once touched by civilizations from across the sea, or is the truth far closer to home? Today, we'll explore the conspiracy theories surrounding the old copper culture and search for the truth of what really happened. Recently, I've been telling the story of the old copper culture. In my documentary, I visited ancient mines, talked to researchers, and even tested copper technology. I recommend checking it out if you haven't, but I will give you a background here first. The old copper culture was present around the upper Great Lakes region of North America between 9,500 to 5,000 years ago. They created thousands of mines on Isle Royale and on the Keweenaw Peninsula of Michigan. This copper was traded throughout the region and turned into all kinds of fascinating tools. They made giant spears, axes, fish hooks, and even copper blades so long they look like swords. This culture would eventually cease its mining efforts around 5,000 years ago for reasons that still remain unknown. This culture has intrigued archaeologists and curious collectors for nearly 2 centuries. European miners who arrived in the region were blown away by the scale of ancient mining operations, which were clearly ancient. And even stranger, the Native Americans they encountered in the region were mainly using stone tools at the time of contact, while the occasional copper items were mostly ornamental. To the people of the 1800s, it appeared that the indigenous people were not related to the ones that had created the mines, and some indigenous people said themselves that they were not responsible. This was the 1800s after all, and many Euro-American settlers had very poor opinions of indigenous people. Many of them hypothesized that some other culture must have created the mines. This is what led to the idea that the miners came from elsewhere, perhaps from ancient Eurasian civilizations. And this brings us to the missing copper problem. You will see online that 500 million tons of copper are missing from Michigan. There are roughly 5,000 to 10,000 mines throughout the Upper Peninsula and Isle Royale, but this estimate of 500,000 tons is pure speculation. It comes from older estimates, and modern archaeologists have rejected these numbers as ill-constructed. The real number is probably a significant amount, but we have no real way to calculate this number accurately. 10,000 mines is still an extraordinary amount, so where did all of this copper go? Well, the answer lies right under my feet in this video. The copper was turned into thousands of artifacts sitting in private collections and lying beneath the earth. The old copper culture was mining and working copper for over 5,000 years. Just take a second to comprehend how long that really is. In certain counties in the region, almost everyone has found something or knows someone with a vast collection. I encountered an old couple who probably had 300 to 400 pieces just themselves. So the idea that there is missing copper is true, but we know where this copper is. It was made into tools for thousands of years. We have no reason to think that an extreme amount of copper was shipped across the Atlantic. Once again, the figure of 500,000 tons is completely made up. And this made-up problem is used to support a range of hypotheses. The most popular being the Phoenician copper hypothesis. The idea that thousands of years ago, Phoenician sailors made it to the Americas and used the abundant copper to fuel the Bronze Age. It all started in 1982 when a shipwreck was discovered off the coast of Turkey. 11 diving campaigns took place over the next decade, totaling 22,413 dives. What they discovered was one of the most spectacular Bronze Age discoveries from the Mediterranean. The wreck was radiocarbon dated to 1320 BC or 3,320 years ago, which puts it at the late Bronze Age. The ship was clearly part of a thriving commercial sea network. It had a mixed cargo of luxury items and raw materials. 354 copper ingots were found on board. They were found in the form of oxide ingots. They are rectangular with a handhold on each corner. The copper totals around 10 tons, quite a valuable supply. But what caught the eye of some theorists was that the copper was extraordinarily pure, 99.5% in fact. They claimed that this was not the process of smelting ore, and only copper from Michigan was of this purity. This claim wouldn't be properly put to rest because no isotope analysis had been conducted. But since the copper was pure, and copper in Michigan is pure, these theorists ran with this point for over a decade. Then, in 2010, an isotope analysis was finally conducted on illaburine copper. They concluded that the ingots were consistent with copper production from Cyprus. Bronze Age smelters were perfectly capable of producing very pure copper from local ores, especially from regions like Cyprus and the Levant, where oxide ores such as malachite and azurite occur. Because these ores are naturally low in impurities, the resulting copper ingots can reach purity levels of 99% or higher without any advanced refining. Cyprus was a major source of Bronze Age ore production, and in fact the word copper comes from the Greek kyprios, Latin cyprium, and eventually the English copper. It is also worth noting that copper is still mined on Cyprus to this day, so there was plenty to fill the Illaburren. Furthermore, some copper came as far as Central Asia to the Mediterranean. A study from a Bronze Age mine from Kazakhstan found that between the early and middle Bronze Age, 55,000 tons of ore were removed. This would have produced 1,750 tons of copper. Keep in mind that the Illaburren only had 10 tons of copper on board. One mine in Kazakhstan could have provided enough copper for 175 Illaburrens, and there are over 100 mines identified from all over the region that could have provided enough copper for the Bronze Age. The Illaburren shipwreck is only around 200 miles from Cyprus, while it is 5,500 miles from Michigan. So a ship off of the coast of Turkey which carried copper from Cyprus was used as evidence for this conspiracy for years. Using Occam's razor, a problem-solving principle that states the simplest explanation is generally the best one, we can conclude that the copper from the shipwreck came from the nearby island. Now, if this copper was found on the coast of Greenland or had actual traces from Michigan, we would have a mystery on our hands, but we simply don't. Economically, it also makes no sense. The Mediterranean already had thousands of tons of copper. Why would the Phoenicians sail 5,500 miles across the treacherous Atlantic, then haul men and supplies through endless rivers, rapids, and portages just to reach Lake Superior, where they'd have to mine for months before braving the deadly voyage home? This would be economic suicide for any company trying to turn a profit. But this idea has even more problems. Copper mining in the Great Lakes region far predates the Phoenicians and even the Bronze Age in Eurasia. There is evidence of lead pollution in lake sediment cores in the Great Lakes region dating back 9,500 years ago, and here's the study for anyone who might doubt this. The oldest artifact that has been radiocarbon dated is a conical point from Wisconsin that was found to have preserved wood in its base. This wood was dated to 8,500 years ago. Copper was not smelted in Eurasia until around 7,000 years ago in southeastern Europe. Furthermore, the Phoenicians did not appear until around 5,000 years ago at the earliest. High-resolution lake sediment cores show that copper mining peaked much earlier, between 6,500 to 5,400 years ago, quite a bit before the Phoenicians even appeared. So yeah, the indigenous of the region were mining and working copper long before the Bronze Age. Hilariously, I even got dozens of comments telling me it was actually the Vikings who were responsible for the old copper culture. One article I found said, records suggest that both the Phoenicians and the Vikings arrived on the east coast of the Americas before and during the Bronze Age. Whoever wrote this should really check their dates. The Vikings didn't appear until the year 793. That is only 1,100 years ago. The old copper culture peaked around 6,000 years ago. This connection makes absolutely no sense, unless the Vikings had time travel machines. Lonzo Meadows is the only undisputed evidence of transatlantic contact with Europeans with the Americas outside of Greenland. It dates back to around the year 1000, and it is a very fascinating site. Imagine being a Viking living so far from home in a new continent all those years ago. While it is impressive, this site is 1,500 miles away from copper country. North America is a very big place, and these guys were nowhere near close to the old copper culture. Literally nothing lines up here. They showed up 5,000 years too late and 1,500 miles too far away. Another way we know that there wasn't sustained contact between some Eurasian population and Native Americans is because of disease. Contact would have undoubtedly resulted in plague for the indigenous. Instead, the Native American immune system was wholly unprepared for this devastation, and the result was up to 95% of them dying. If the Phoenicians or Vikings had made extensive mining operations in the region, these diseases would have swept through the continent way earlier and they would have been better prepared for what was coming. There are a handful of unconfirmed rune stones and carvings found throughout the Great Lakes region. Many have been exposed as fakes made in the 19th century, and I will provide resources for anyone curious. But one found all the way in the upper Great Lakes has certainly caught my attention. Near the city of Copper Harbor on the tip of the Keweenaw Peninsula, there lies some fascinating carvings. I got a chance to visit them this summer with a local. There is a carving of a bear, some more enigmatic carvings, and this magnificent ship. Here are the reconstructions so you can see the pattern much more clearly. These petroglyphs have fascinated locals and researchers for decades. Little is known about their discovery, and less is known about their origin. Nobody can say for sure if they're ancient or if they're fake. Many have jumped to the conclusion that this ship may represent a Viking or Phoenician ship. If you look at its form, it does depict a large sailing vessel with a raised bow and stern. The form of the carving is much different from Scandinavian petroglyphs depicting Viking-era ships. My personal hypothesis is that this may actually represent a sailing craft from the old copper culture. It is admittedly far-fetched, but let me lay out my reasoning. In the 1950s, a dugout canoe 32 feet or 10 meters long was found in northern Michigan. It was large enough to carry 15 to 20 people and possibly up to 4,000 pounds of cargo. Though this canoe is probably much younger than the old copper culture, it proves that large boats could be made from trees. But it is possible with better woodworking tools such as copper axes, adzes, and nails, a much larger boat could have been made. Now this sounds unlikely, but let's consider Isle Royale. This large island is found off of the coast of Minnesota and Lake Superior. It has thousands of copper mines on it and was a major source of copper for thousands of years. This island is only around 20 miles from the mainland, but the voyage can be dangerous due to the unpredictable nature of Gichigami. Just ask the Edmund Fitzgerald. Perhaps large watercraft were created not just to stay safe while making this crossing, but also for carrying back all of the copper in as few trips as possible. Henry Gilman, one of the first researchers to conduct the prehistoric mines at Isle Royale, hypothesized himself way back in the 1800s that it may have required larger watercraft. The following is from a letter in which he describes the true scale of his discoveries. Though it is hard to guess how long it would have taken to create the extensive mining remains found near McCargo Cove today, it seems reasonable to estimate that it would have taken several centuries. The ancient mining societies certainly shipped the copper, the object of their toil, back to the mainland, where it was traded extensively across the region. When contemplating this new evidence, several questions naturally come to mind. How did these people know about the deposits at such a remote, isolated place? How did they come to be present in such large numbers as implied by the character of their vessels or sailing craft? How did such a large population support life in such an extreme environment while still carrying on their mining operations? It is certainly possible that large, complex wooden watercraft were created. Check out these boats made around 4,000 years ago to cross between Ireland and Britain. They were made with planks fitted together in complex joints with moss in between them. With sophisticated copper tools, it is certainly possible that these ancient miners made similarly complex watercraft. Perhaps this carving really does date all the way back to the days of the old copper culture. Supporting this is the location of the carvings. When we were there, we noticed that sand was all around us. David hypothesized that this site may lie near the Nipissing shoreline. The shoreline of Lake Superior was once much higher than it is today, and between 5,000 to 6,000 years ago, it reached a high point, the Nipissing phase. We were not able to confirm if this carving lies right on the Nipissing shoreline or slightly higher, though it certainly wasn't underwater. This raises the possibility that these ancient carvings could date back thousands of years. This is a fascinating possibility. Imagine if people of the old copper culture really had complex sailing craft. It would make sense considering the size of the Great Lakes. They are basically freshwater oceans. While I've had a lot of fun speculating about this, the most likely possibility is that they are simply modern fakes. There are a handful of carvings made in the 19th century by European immigrants that were later mistaken for ancient petroglyphs. This includes people from Scandinavia who carved Viking ships and runes on stones in the region. This one was recently discovered in Canada. One of the world's leading runologists concluded that the runes spelled out the Lord's Prayer, rendered in an old Swedish version that dates back to 1611. So we know for a fact that some European immigrants were making carvings in the region during the 19th century. In conclusion, we cannot say for sure who made these carvings or when, but we do know that the Phoenicians were not mining copper in Michigan during the Bronze Age, and neither were the time-traveling Vikings. But I feel I should address another claim, that a far older group of Europeans made it to the Americas long before the end of the last glacial period. The solutrean hypothesis claims that people from the solutrean culture of Western Europe crossed Atlantic ice and were the first to inhabit the Americas. One of the main forms of evidence being that haplogroup X is found in the Americas. Interestingly, When you look up haplogroup X on a map, you can see it clusters around the Near East and Europe, but also North America. This map has been used all over the internet to support the idea that Europeans during the last glacial period were actually the first to inhabit the Americas. I have even gotten dozens of comments claiming this on my documentary. But is this true? Is there really a genetic link to Europeans in the Americas dating back thousands of years ago? This is a seemingly fantastic connection until you realize that the Native American haplogroup X2A and X2G are not descended from the European X2B, X2D, or X2C clades. Genetic analysis shows that X2A diverged thousands of years before the solutrean period, meaning they do not share a recent common ancestor. Haplogroup X isn't just European. It's also found in the Near East, the Caucasus, Central Asia, and Siberia. Importantly, no solutrean-specific or European-only version of X has ever been found in the Americas. Instead, the pattern matches an Asian origin and migration across Beringia, like other Native American haplogroups. If solutreans had contributed to Native American ancestry, we would expect to see multiple European genetic markers in Native Americans. Instead, the genome-wide data overwhelmingly shows ancestry from Siberian or East Asian sources, with no solutrean or European signal. Ancient DNA from early Native American remains like Kennewick Man or the Clovis remains of Anzac I confirms that no European markers were present in ancient populations. Also, a little side note, people keep commenting, man, the Younger Dryas sent these people back to the Stone Age. Like, what are you even talking about? This culture appeared thousands of years after the Younger Dryas and peaked around 7,000 years after the Younger Dryas. The Younger Dryas was just a cold snap at the end of the last glacial period, but people have become convinced that an apocalypse wiped everything out. If you were curious, I have an entire video breaking down the science about this period. If anything, this culture flourished after the Younger Dryas when the climate stabilized. As of yet, we have no evidence copper was worked before the Younger Dryas in North America. After posting my old copper culture documentary, I was very disappointed to see so many people commenting that no, it was the Vikings, the Phoenicians, and many others said it wasn't the natives, it was a group of white people, it was the solutreans, anything but the indigenous people of the region were responsible. It really just reminds me of this meme. I don't want to accuse anybody of prejudice, but the mental gymnastics some of these people go through to just tie white people into the mining is astounding. Again, Occam's razor, what makes more sense? The natives started their own unique mining tradition, or people from 5,500 miles away came all the way here and left absolutely no evidence? Archaeology, linguistics, and oral history all confirm that the Anishinaabe have lived in the Great Lakes region for thousands of years. Archaeological evidence links them to the woodland cultures and traditions like pottery, mound building, and wild rice use. Genetic evidence such as Malhi et al. 2007 analyzed mitochondrial DNA from burials from 3,000 years ago in southwestern Ontario. Their migration stories, together with French accounts from the 1600s, affirm this deep ancestral presence in the region. So in conclusion, these conspiracies are all lacking evidence and are awfully deeply logically flawed. There are certainly real mysteries surrounding the old copper culture, but they don't involve transatlantic trade, as far as we know at the moment. Alright, thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Arrivederci.